Do Arab leaders have an alternative to Donald Trump's proposal to displace Palestinians from Gaza? Some have met to discuss the future of the war-torn strip, and they didn't hold back on their rejection of the US president's idea. But will they be able to make him change his mind? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. US President Donald Trump has ruffled many feathers since he announced his proposal to take over Gaza. According to him, more than 2 million Palestinians should leave to somewhere nice and safe, like Jordan or Egypt, while he builds a Riviera on the Mediterranean in Gaza. This idea has angered the international community, and the Arab world has downright rejected it. But what can they suggest instead? A meeting on Friday of Gulf nations in Riyadh, joined by Egypt and Jordan, ended with no concrete counter-proposals. They'll be meeting in Cairo in the coming weeks. We'll talk more about this in today's show, but first this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
The US will own it, and the Palestinians should leave. Donald Trump revealed his proposal for Gaza early in February, and the main person supporting it was in the room with him, Israel's Prime Minister.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
The suggestion sparked international outrage. As Trump stated himself, it would mean more than 2 million Palestinians having to move out of Gaza permanently and resettle elsewhere.
They must be allowed home. They must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution.
What happened in Gaza was a genocide. Honestly, I don't think that the United States, who participated in everything, is the country that should take care of Gaza.
It is vital to stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing.
Trump reiterated his idea of forcibly displacing Palestinians during a meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah.
Well, it's not where I want them to live. It's going to be where we ultimately choose as a group. And I believe we'll have a parcel of land in Jordan. I believe we'll have a parcel of land in Egypt. We may have someplace else, but I think when we finish our talks, we'll have a place where they're going to live very happily and very safely.
That was rejected by Jordan and Egypt, along with other Arab states.
I think that if President Trump continues with this method of pressuring Gaza, the Arab world, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, and all of these influential powers in the region, I think that instead of resolving the Palestinian issue with a just solution based on two states, he will lead the Middle East into a new cycle of intense conflict between the Arabs and Israel.
As Gulf nations, as well as Egypt and Jordan, gathered behind closed doors in Riyadh to discuss Gaza on Friday, Trump dialed back on his plan in an interview with Fox News Radio, saying he only recommends it and wouldn't impose it. The Arab League is expected to respond at an extraordinary meeting in Cairo, scheduled for next month. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our panel of guests to discuss all of this today. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Dania Thafer. She's Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum and lecturer at Georgetown University. In London, Yossi Mekelberg is Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House. And in Amman, Jordan, Daoud Kuttab is a Palestinian journalist and author of The State of Palestine Now. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Dania, let me start with you. This summit that took place in Riyadh only lasted a few hours. Who attended and what was the aim?
So the summit consisted of the 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries and Egypt and Jordan. And it was an unofficial meeting, actually. as they stated. But clearly, it is to address the elephant in the room, which is Trump's stated plan of displacing the Palestinians in Gaza. And of course, it's been said that the discussion was looking at a plan that will be proposed by Cairo, by Egypt, and in coming up with an alternative plan to Trump's stated plan. And that's where they're at this point.
Okay, Daoud, I mean, I was last week at this time in Munich for the Munich Security Conference when this was first announced, this meeting. And it seems the guest list, lots of different rumours who was going to attend, and it changed several times. First time I heard about it, it was just going to be Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan and Egypt, and then it expanded. And then at one point I was told the Palestinian Authority were going to be there. They weren't. Is that significant?
Well, I think one of the problems we have is two parts. One is who's going to pay for the reconstruction, and we were talking about different phases of reconstruction. And secondly, who's going to govern Gaza? And what the Palestinians would like to see is some kind of an agreement between the PLO and Ramallah and Hamas, so that the Oslo Accords is respected, which is that Gaza and the West Bank are a single unit, and it should be governed in a single way. That, I think, is the reason why they kept the Palestinians away, so that they can come up with some kind of a resolution, maybe a temporary Arab or Palestinian governors of Gaza until there is a national unity among Palestinians between the PLO and Hamas. I think that's why I think the UAE probably opposed the PLO arriving without having a national unity government underway.
Yossi, are we getting a bit ahead of ourselves here? Because there's still a very fragile ceasefire, and phase 1, 42 days long, is coming to an end. And we don't even know there's going to be a phase 2, do we?
Yes, and we knew all along that this was and is still a very fragile ceasefire. There is no trust whatsoever between the sides. What we saw is creating some momentum between the sides, because the heart of this agreement, what was agreed, has been implemented so far with the return of the hostages, returning of many of Palestinians to the place of origins within Gaza, the release of the Palestinian prisoners, the humanitarian aid. So some things works, but at the same time, we see that both sides, naturally after this kind of war, are suspicious of one another, and they also have ulterior motives beyond ending the war. Now, I think phase 2 is the most difficult one, because both sides are going to lose their main bargaining chip. From Hamas' point of view, the hostages, from Israel point of view, if it agrees to the end of war. And we know the pressures within the Israeli government not to reach the second phase. And we know that if Netanyahu has to choose between a ceasefire and moving away from this war and the coalition and staying in power, he probably will choose to stay in power.
Dania, if I come back to the Riyadh summit, this is guesswork. There was no statement from the summit, so we really don't know what happened when those leaders met. But no statement. What does that mean to you? What does that say to you? Does that mean there was no agreement at the summit? Or does it perhaps mean that these leaders thought it wasn't a very good idea to put out a statement at this time? They wanted to stay below the radar. They didn't want to do anything that would further attract Trump's attention.
I think the most important component, from some of the leaders in the Arab world, like Saudi Arabia, is to have consensus building and a collective response to any major issue affecting the Arab region. And this is one of them. And so I think they're going to wait and defer to the March 4th meeting, the Arab League meeting, the extraordinary summit, and decide to release a collective official statement there. And there has been discussions with the Egyptians about their proposal for addressing a counter proposal to Trump. One, they were saying to find areas and establish safe areas for the people in Gaza to live until they remove the rubble and rebuild, and have a conference to engage different stakeholders in the rebuilding process. So, I mean, there has been leaks of discussions of the discussion that happened there, but nothing has been officially said.
Daoud, I mean, there are questions here, not just about the policy, and I want to talk about that in a moment, but there are also questions about how you deal with Trump. He is the most unusual leader to deal with. If we look at what happened on February the 11th, Jordan's King Abdullah went to the Oval Office, looked very uncomfortable, but he met him. He flattered him. He brought new proposals offering to provide medical treatment to 2,000 Palestinian children. And what he didn't do is confront the president in public, which is very different from what, in a very different sphere, President Zelensky is doing. Is that the way to deal with him?
Well, I think the king understands that he's in a very difficult position because diplomatically, U.S. is an ally of both Jordan and Egypt and Israel, of course. And so they don't want to upset him, and especially in the public domain. In fact, people are saying that the king was ambushed by the press coming in because they had agreed that there will be no press conference. So he was in a very difficult position. But yes, he did survive that. And he did keep both his own people and their desire for sovereignty of Jordan, and at the same time without angering President Trump. So I think probably that would be the more safe position, is not to anger publicly Trump and work out deals behind the scenes. And maybe that's why the summit in Riyadh did not issue a statement, as you said, and the second idea you had, in that it basically wants to keep Trump out of the public domain, because he only depends and lives in the public domain, but work things out with Mike Rubio, with the advisor on national security and other people, because I think that might be a better way. And I think Trump is already saying, I'll accept whatever they will accept, things like that. So I think they're trying to do that. I think the Arab countries want to keep their alliance with the U.S. Saudi Arabia, of course, also wants to keep its good relations, that they have been extremely friendly with the Trump administration and Jared Kushner and so on. And so I think everybody wants Trump to be happy in the public domain, but also work out things behind the scenes with him.
Yossi, Trump says so much, gives so many interviews. I think it's worth pointing out the latest thing he said, or one of the latest things he said to Fox News in a phone interview. It seems to be a softening of his position on this. He said he would recommend his Gaza expulsion plan, but I am not forcing it, were his words, Yossi. But I think the significant thing here is this is an idea that was unthinkable before, apart from some on the very extreme right in Israel. But now there are quite a few people in Israel who support this plan, are there not?
Yeah, I think the problem with, we knew that Trump is unpredictable. And we said before his inauguration, but he brings the unpredictability to a completely new level. I think, he behaves as a bully in the international arena. We see it in Ukraine, we see it with Palestine. And I think with bullies, you need to be assertive with. I'm not so sure that flattery all the time will work with Trump. I think what Zelensky did, whether it's behind the scenes or in public, but standing up, this is unacceptable. You see, the very fact that it's now on the agenda that the President of the United States wants to commit a war crime and expel forcefully 2.3 million people, and this is like almost an equal footing on two-state solution and other legitimate solution, is something that needs to be rejected. He went even further than the right in Israel. Smotrich, not that it makes it any better, was talking about forcing out of Gaza 1 million. Trump said, hey, more than 2 million, all of them, building a Riviera, but not for them, and permanently. So I think in this sense, we need also, and that's what the importance of the summit and the summit then in Cairo, is to removing off the agenda. The only positive thing about what Trump does, that he helped us to focus our minds and know that there is such unacceptable, unsettling alternative. So we need to think about constructive, helpful alternative, which will lead eventually to a two-state solution.
Dania, when we hear these words several times now from Trump in the Oval Office, Gaza is a hellhole, absolutely destroyed. It's a demolition site. No one seems to confront him with why and who did this, because this was man-made destruction and the collective punishment of everyone in Gaza. When we look at the plans ahead, I know the countries of the Arab world are trying to come up with a plan, but morally, it's Israel that should be paying, isn't it? Paying reparations and damages to the families of those civilians that have been killed in Gaza.
I think it's really important to go back and just address Trump, because I know this is a factor that everyone is discussing, and since I'm based here in Washington, D.C., I think, people say you should take Trump seriously, but not literally when he's speaking. And I would have to say that there are different theories and perspectives of why Trump has said what he said. One is he wants to change where the discussion is going and the conversation. So the Arab states were saying that they wanted a Palestinian state, and he's definitely not amenable to that idea. And so he wants to change the conversation not to be about having a Palestinian state. And second, they have attached any reconstruction or rebuilding to that Palestinian state, and he wants to change that conversation. Two, there have been some that said that he's trying to placate the right-wing players in Netanyahu's cabinet who do not want to go to the second phase, and he wants to move it forward to the second phase. That's, could be just an idea, that a theory, a plausible theory of why Trump is doing what he's doing. But I think that it's important to note that he really wanted to change the conversation and engage with all of the parties about Gaza and make it into something that he thinks that his Israeli allies are going to agree to.
Daoud, we don't know much about the next step. We know there's a summit on the 4th of March of all the Arab countries, and we know there is an Egyptian plan. That has not been published, but we do know the Egyptian Prime Minister, Mustafa Madbouli, on Wednesday at a news conference, claimed that his country could rebuild Gaza, and he said in 3 years, truly 3 years is an acceptable timeline to do this. And yet there was a recent report by the UN, the World Bank and the EU, which said you'd only get basic services running in 3 years. It would take 10 years. Do you think that it's at all realistic, this timeline Egypt is floating?
I think if the Gazans and the Egyptians have free ability to work in Gaza, yes, I think 3 years would be enough. It's not a big area. And just imagine if the Egyptian army is employed to take out all the ordinances, if the Egyptian machines are allowed to clean up the areas, and if you're allowed to bring in prefabricated housing, yes, you could do many things in a short period. But the problem I think that we have to deal with, and I think they have to deal with, is who will govern Gaza. I think that's the elephant in the room more than Trump. I think the elephant in the room is how to deal in a way that you cannot run Gaza by Hamas, but you cannot run Gaza without Hamas. You have to find some kind of equilibrium in which Hamas accepts some type of a Palestinian or Arab governing authority in Gaza without, messing up their ability to govern. And at the same time, I think Hamas wants to make sure that this is like what Saudi Arabia wants. It's a part of the roadmap to a Palestinian state. Remember, Gaza and the West Bank are a single unit as far as the Oslo Accords are concerned. The Oslo Accords were signed at the White House under Bill Clinton, but still an American sponsor of the Oslo Accords. That has to be revisited, and the unity between Gaza and the West Bank. Imagine if Gaza and the West Bank, the borders are open, so people from Gaza can come and live in the West Bank until Gaza is reopened. Nobody thinks of that. They only think of Gazans going to Egypt or to Jordan. But what about Gazans going to the West Bank? What about Gazans going to the Negev in Israel? So I think the Israelis have to deal with the right of Palestinians to move, the movement, and I think that could resolve some of the problems. But yes, it's not going to be easy to rebuild and reconstruct without an agreement both on who's going to construct and who's going to govern Gaza.
Yossi, on that, I mean, the Egyptian plan seems to suggest, from everything I've read and people I've spoken to, there'll be some sort of committee of technocrats and community leaders. Is that going to be acceptable to Israel? Because if it's not acceptable to Netanyahu, we're pretty much going to assume it won't be acceptable to Trump.
I think it should be, because at the end of the day, someone should govern Gaza, and it should be part of a bigger process in which eventually the West Bank and Gaza are part of one governed body, eventually emerges as an independent Palestinian state. And I think Daoud is absolutely right. We are still captured in the conversation of before the war, before October 7, of a security paradigm that collapsed altogether. And we need to change this security paradigm into something which is collaborative, in which we understand that this division between Gaza and the West Bank is unhealthy and actually one of the reasons that led to this disaster. The one that everyone needs to have security, both Israelis and Palestinians, either security for everyone or security for no one. And the idea of technocratic government, it's that create the space which removes some of the politics out of it, the animosity that we have seen over the last 70 months and obviously before that, into a more constructive approach that try to rebuild, yes, Gaza, but also rebuild the relations between Israel and the Palestinians. So this space is important as long as the right things are done. And the right-wing government in Israel can't have the monopoly to decide everything. It should be done together with the Palestinians and with the region.
Dania, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in the region this week, and he has hinted that he'd like to see boots on the ground to secure the security of Gaza. And he also said, I quote, "I can tell you that any plan that leaves Hamas there is going to be a problem because Israel is not going to tolerate it." Do you think there is an appetite from Arab countries, particularly Gulf countries, to actually send troops?
I think there has been discussions with the UAE about the future governance of Gaza and security, and nothing has been officially released. But I know that there have been discussions about different ways to manage this. I think a lot of the Arab states are nervous about coming in at the tail end of Israeli troops and playing a security role in Gaza. So they have talked about different ways of moving forward with that. Some have mentioned having, retired or experienced policemen from the Palestinian Authority going there. There have been talks also about having mercenaries there as well, or about playing different kind of roles there. But I think nothing official has been released.
OK, Daoud, let me bring you in again on that, on who might take security control, because I thought there was an interesting comment recently from Osama Hamdan. He is a top official of Hamas. Yes, Hamas is weakened, but it's still there. He said, whoever wants to take Israel's place will be treated just like Israel.
Yes, that's why I said that I think you cannot find a solution that will work unless Hamas agrees to it. But if you want to put boots on the ground, I think it would be welcomed if you put them both in Gaza and the West Bank. And Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas have said, if NATO wants to come in the Jordan Valley to protect and support a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank, that would be welcome. But the idea of just doing it in Gaza without the West Bank, where the settlers continue to, act in this way, and Netanyahu's army is now, demolishing homes and refugee camps and so on, that will not work, and nobody will accept that. But if you have an international force, a NATO force, a UN force that's both in the Gaza and the West Bank, that would be a temporary presence until there is an independent Palestinian state in both Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I think that will be welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our guests today. Dania Thafer in Washington, D.C., Yossi Mekelberg in London, and Daoud Kuttab in Amman, Jordan. Comprehensive coverage of the situation inside Gaza and the diplomacy about its future continues on Al Jazeera, with further analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. As ever, we want to hear from you. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Alternatively, you can find us on X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and all the team here, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.